Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be answering one very simple question: should you play a rogue in the Burning Crusade Classic? This video will cover three very important topics. First of all, what are all the brand new spells and talents? Secondly, do I think that the playstyle is fun? And then thirdly, the PvE and PvP performance. By the way guys, if you want to do me a solid and help me out a little bit, please consider subscribing to the channel and checking if you are subscribed right now, because you may think you are because you see my videos so often in your video feed, but you may not actually be subscribed. But anyway, let's jump into the video. So the first ability we're going to talk about is Shiv, which is one of my absolute favourites. So, performs an instant offhand weapon attack that automatically applies the poison from your offhand weapon to the target. Slow weapons require more energy, awards 1 combo point. And the reason why I like this so much is because you don't have to wait around for RNG on your poison procs to get stuff like crippling poison onto the target. Shiv can be used very intelligently in a raiding environment. For instance, you have to switch targets. Nice to quickly do a Shiv, refresh your deadly poison dot, so that when you are not on the target, you are continuing to deal damage while not on that target. It's also just nice if you get really bad RNG just to get those deadly poison stacks up in the first place. For instance, you may be switching back to a target and you have like 2 seconds left on deadly poison before it totally falls off, and then you have to build up the stacks again. Well, throw in a Shiv and then you totally refresh those 5 stacks. Just a great ability in my opinion to save your rotation and get rid of those frustrations that you may have had previously, relying on poison proc RNG. Next we had Deadly Throw, a finishing move that reduces the movement speed of a target by 50% for 6 seconds and causes increased thrown weapon damage based on your combo points to a maximum of 1132 damage on 5 combo points. Obviously that will scale with your attack power. Now this is obviously mainly a PvP ability, although it may have some niche value in a PvE environment when you cannot get into melee range on a particular target. An example of this could be during the shatter mechanic on Grulls, where you have to move away from the boss, but while you're moving away from the boss you can just sneak in a little bit of range damage with Deadly Throw. Since you already have crippling poison, this ability is mainly used in a dire, desperate situation where there's only a smidge of damage left in order to kill a target and they're not in melee range. I've seen some really crazy arena games where rogues just use Deadly Throw at the last second to score a kill, and it is very, very useful. Next we have Envenom, which honestly is a little bit of a strange ability since it does less damage than Eviscerate and consumes all of your deadly poison stacks, which is a little bit awkward. If you're playing a Mutilate rogue, which definitely needs its own video, you will probably use Envenom in the last 5 seconds of a boss fight, and that is it. Like, it has such niche usage, you will just never really use it that much and probably won't see anybody else use it incredibly much either. You will mainly see Envenom being used in more of a PvP scenario. Next we have Cloak of Shadows, which is an absolute godsend ability for rogues because it near enough guarantees you able to vanish. So let me explain why that is. So instantly removes all existing harmful spell effects and increases your chance to resist all spells by 90% for 5 seconds. Does not remove effects that prevent you from using Cloak of Shadows. So what rogues generally do is a Cloak of Shadows and then vanish when they've got dots on them so that they can successfully get back into stealth. Now they can do this in arenas, which is extremely powerful to like reopen on stealth, a cheap shot, Garrote, and all the other great things that you can, do in a stealth opener. And overall it is also an extremely powerful defensive ability. Next we have Shutterstep, probably one of the most fun abilities in the game. Attempts to step through the shadows and reappear behind your target and increase your movement speed by 70% for 3 seconds. The damage of your next ability is increased by 20%. Threat cost is reduced by 50%, whatever, and it's also on a very short 30-second cooldown, only costs 10 energy. Because of this ability, it is just impossible to escape a rogue now in arena, and it's impossible to get kited, really. This ability is basically giving you the ability to teleport behind your target. You really cannot ask for a more overpowered gap closing ability. Unfortunately, you will have to spec all the way down into the last talent of a subtlety tree to pick up this talent. Now the last new ability is Mutilate. So again, this is a very niche ability because not many people spec deep into assassination in TBC. Some people like it for PvP, although most people do prefer to go for Subtlety. This is largely considered to be the most overpowered spec. Mutilate is a little bit more difficult to master, but nonetheless it's a very interesting ability. It instantly attacks with both weapons for an additional 44 of each weapon's damage increased by 50% against the poison targets. You must be behind the target, and also requires daggers, so it's basically a double backstab. It's a very vicious sounding and looking ability. Some rogues do also like to go for the Mutilate spec in PvE, but it is not as good as the typical combat double sword spec. Now let's talk about some of the talents that I personally find quite interesting, and just skip the ones that just give a certain increase to your damage. Now, at the end of the combat tree, you now have a talent surprise attack. Your finishing moves can no longer be dodged, and the damage dealt by your Sinister Strike, Backstab, Shiv, and yada yada is increased by 10%. So now your abilities simply can't be dodged, which is really nice. Here we have combat efficiency. Basically your offhand attacks generate extra energy. Here we have your talent Fleet-Footed, increases the chance to resist movement impairing effects by 10%, but also just passively increases your movement speed by 15%, very similar to the Paladin's Pursuit of Justice. Next we have the very overpowered talent Cheat Death. Okay, you have basically 100% chance that whenever you would die, you basically don't die. I don't know, I mean, that to me is basically, let's be honest, a bit of a cheat code. And what it will do is reduce you to 10% of your maximum health, and then also reduce other damage you take by 90% for 3 seconds. Okay, and it's also modified by resilience, but it can only affect, well, the cooldown on this, the internal cooldown is 1 minute, so, which is pretty ridiculous. We also have this very cheeky talent, Master of Subtlety, which, while you basically in stealth, and for 6 seconds after stealth, you just get an increased chunk of damage. Now let's start talking about the playstyle of the class. Like, do I actually think it's a fun playstyle? We'll start with PvE, because I definitely think it's fun in PvP. So you're probably thinking, does it change that much from classic WoW? It does a tiny bit, okay, just a tiny bit, but it is still a fairly standard and basic rotation, although there is room for you to take it a little bit further with some extra mastery to, push a little bit higher on the DPS meters and stand out from everyone else. First of all, you have Sinister Strike and the occasional Shiv when it's needed to build up combo points. You're going to obviously burn those combo points on Slice and Dice. This is the most powerful finisher that you can use because it massively increases your white melee damage, and you just need it up permanently essentially. And then your finisher, you won't really be using Eviscerate that much. You only really be using Eviscerate on short enemies like ads or trash ads, like when you're clearing a dungeon or anything, because you mainly want to be using Rupture, which will be basically a better DPS increase over Eviscerate, partly because it costs less energy and certain mechanics. Obviously you have to move around a lot, and leaving Rupture on a target will allow you to continue to deal damage while not being in melee range, and that's why Rupture can be quite cheeky at times. But yeah, like on an enemy that is going to be dead within the space of about 10 seconds, then you will use stuff like Eviscerate instead. So you will get more options, which is nice. And obviously there are a number of methods to push your DPS a little further. For instance, timing your Sinister Strikes a millisecond after your weapon swing so that you don't clip your, auto attacks on a sword specialization proc, or from a weapon proc effect that obviously gives you an extra weapon swing. Could also increase your damage slightly by essentially having big balls and standing in mechanics that you need to avoid with Cloak of Shadows popped. But again, you need big balls to do that, and it will push your DPS a little bit further, but I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you really know that you can keep yourself alive. And obviously Deadly Throw comes into play just a little bit when you are not in melee range of a target. So overall, it is still the basic scaffolding like it is in in Classic WoW, but there's just a little bit more in your toolkit, a little bit more flavour to the class, a few extra abilities and interesting talents here and there to make things just that slightly little more interesting. As a rogue, you also never have to worry about threat because you have Feint and Vanish to totally, well, obviously Vanish totally drops your threat, and then Feint is very short. In fact, does it even have a cooldown? Okay, yeah, it has 10-second cooldown, and it will drop your threat significantly, so you never have to worry about threat, which is very nice, because a lot of DPS, they do have to worry about their threat and throttle and limit their DPS because of that, and then as a rogue you really do not need to worry about such miscellaneous issues. You also bring a decent amount of utility to the raid. Don't listen to what anybody else tells you, because what you have is a big stun toolkit, which can be useful in a number of different boss mechanics and raid encounters and everything like that. Because when you're stunning a deadly enemy ad, then you are, well, you're just doing the raid a huge favour, because you're massively going to be reducing the damage that the raid takes and just generally saving everyone's life. You also have Blind, which is a very useful, very instantaneous CC ability, which can be useful in a tight situation too. You obviously also got Kick, and you will need kickers in TBC for a number of different bosses. You've also got Crippling Poison, which is a very reliable slow ability, and I'm pretty sure it is the biggest movement speed reduction effect in the game, so it can be very useful at pinning down enemy ads, again, which are deadly and attacking your, the rest of your raid. You can help your raid team essentially kite difficult enemies. And obviously you've also got abilities like Sprint, which are very useful for getting out of deadly mechanics. And then one last thing, because you have the ability Vanish, when a boss fight is, going a bit, well, wrong, what you can easily do is vanish, totally leave combat, wait for the boss to reset, and then if you have engineering, you can resurrect a healer to basically, get the raid all resurrected. So you do have some pretty decent wipe protection when you do have engineering. So, final verdict, I definitely think it is more of a more fun classes to play as a DPS in TBC Classic. I personally played a Rogue all the way through Classic, and I did find it very enjoyable. And in TBC, they just have some great new stuff to play around with, and therefore the class is just a little bit more interesting. Now, when it comes to explaining the Rogue playstyle in PvP, honestly, I could probably make a half-an-hour video explaining this. There's just so much depth to the class when it comes to PvP. There's just so many different things to talk about. If you want a deeper insight, I'd recommend checking out the Silent Shadows Rogue Discord. It's a very interesting website. It will give you some very in-depth information when it comes to getting good as a rogue in TBC. So, the reason why a rogue is probably one of the most popular arena classes in TBC is simply because they have a huge, and I mean gigantic, toolkit. It's almost as if they have a solution to every problem, right? You're being kited by a resto druid, you can easily catch up to him with something like Shutterstep and stun him so he doesn't, swap forms. If you need to provide appeals for your healer, you've got Crippling Poison to slow melee DPS, and you've got Gouge to prevent them from doing any actions. If you need to apply an immense amount of pressure on one of the DPS classes, but you want to ensure that the healer is not doing any healing, you have a massive amount of different crowd control abilities to chain with other CC abilities from other classes, so you can set up gigantic crowd control chains way into like 20 seconds. Obviously the healer will have to trinket at some point, but my point is, you've got a lot of crowd control as a rogue which sync very nicely with other class crowd control. You have powerful defensive abilities like Cheat Death, like we talked about before. You have Cloak of Shadows and a short cooldown, and then you can also do stealth and totally avoid damage entirely. And then on top of all this, your burst damage is literally insane. Rogues go very well with a number of different comps in 3v3 and also 2v2s. I think they shine mostly in 2v2s because of their insane stealth openers. Like some arena games, when you're against a rogue, can be decided within a space of 30 seconds. I think overall, if you want to get the most out of playing a rogue, the most fun experience, I'd honestly not focus on doing raiding content. I would focus on PvP. You're going to have an absolute blast of a time. I know it sounds cringy, but you really are. Now let's start talking about their actual performance. I think, in PvP, it goes without saying, you don't really need me to explain it. They're an S tier class. You'll get Gladiator as a rogue if you put the hours in and, progressively overload your skill and get better every week. You're going to get Gladiator. You go well in a number of different comps, and it won't be difficult to find an arena partner. Maybe more difficult if you go Mutilate spec. The go-to spec really is the Shutterstep spec. But I'll make more videos about that in the future. So let's address the elephant in the room finally. Probably been waiting for this moment in the video. Are they any good when it comes to raiding? Personally, I absolutely hate the amount of stigma that rogues get in TBC. I think it's totally unnecessary and totally uncalled for. Now, let's talk about where this stigma comes from. So, there's obviously big communities out there that have been playing on private servers for a number of years. What private servers generally do, if you don't already know guys, is they massively buff the content to make it more difficult for an audience that's obviously, you know, used to the tactics, knows all the tactics, knows what all the best in slot gear, the best add-ons, everything like that, to make the content a little bit more challenging. And what this inevitably breeds, what it inevitably creates, is a extremely sweaty min-max culture. But to be honest, it's needed, right? But the content is more difficult, which means you have to be a little bit more sweaty, you have to min-max more, you have to pull up your pants and try hard. But when TBC Classic comes out, it's going to be a much more casual experience. It's nowhere near comprehensible to TBC private server difficulty or retail World of Warcraft difficulty with their Mythic raids or anything like that. It is incredibly, well, just easier and much more casual, fun raiding experience. So this level of min-max attitude is really just, it's just not needed in any shape or form. Okay, if you bring 3 rogues to a 25-man raid group, it's not going to prevent you from killing the bosses. It just, I'm sorry, but it just isn't. Okay, well maybe if you bring like loads and loads of melee DPS and barely bring any range, then fair enough. But this attitude that, oh, okay, you'll just let one rogue into the raid to fill in the spot, it's just a really terrible attitude to have towards TBC raiding. I mean, fair enough, in the early phases of tier 4, yes, the ranged DPS will do, you know, a couple hundred more DPS than a rogue any day, any time, okay? Fair enough, they do more DPS. Yes, the mechanics are friendlier to ranged DPS, but the thing that people don't realise is, first of all, it's easier to gear up a more balanced raid setup, which means overall your raid is going to be doing more DPS on a week by week basis because you're just, you know, balancing out and spreading out that gear more evenly. Okay. Secondly, not every, you know, boss fight is tailored for ranged DPS, right? I've seen some crazy footage of Fury Warriors and Rogues in tier 4 content absolutely smashing on cleave fights like Magfaridons and just totally thrashing the range DPS when it comes to the DPS meters. I've also seen from personal experience on Gruul's the Dragon Slayer, whatever his name is, that, you know, Rogues and Fury Warriors absolutely trump the range DPS on that fight as well, and I think it's partly because they can continue to deal DPS while they're adjusting their position for the shatter mechanic, whereas a range DPS, they have to make much more of an effort to walk around and, you know, stop dealing their damage. And they also get silenced throughout the fight too, whereas the melee can just kind of continue dealing their DPS. So, you know, not every single fight you're going to see range DPS like Rogues and, sorry, not Rogues, obviously, you know, Warlocks and Hunters absolutely trumping everyone on the DPS meters. It's not going to happen, okay? Not on every single fight. And this probably sounds like a bit of a broken record, but a raid leader, an intelligent raid leader, will rather bring a reliable rogue who min-maxes his character and turns up to raids on time, you know, and has high attendance, over a warlock who hasn't even bothered to craft a spell strike set, who, you know, has 50% attendance, okay? And then when you do start to get ridiculous gear, like at the end of tier 4 going into tier 5, then the DPS really isn't, you know, such a country mile in between, okay? Warlocks and Rogues won't do like double the DPS of a Rogue, okay? They'll do a little bit more, they'll do 10 to 20% more, and then on some fights they'll do even more than that, but for the majority of the time, you know, they're not absolutely pulling ahead to large levels. And then when you get into tier 6, Black Temple and everything, and then it's more of an even playing field, okay? Because this is just like a... It's why I don't believe that Blizzard should have introduced 2.4.3 talents like from day one. It's kind of... It's what creates this kind of these imbalance issues where, you know, melee DPS just scale better later into the expansion. Obviously one of the issues is that everyone already knows this, which means it's going to deter people from playing a rogue at the beginning of TBC, which again is just going to massively stagnate the class population in the game. You're just going to see too many rogues you're going to see too little rogues and then too many warlocks and hunters just flying around, and it's just going to be generally a lot less interesting when you're jumping into a raid group, because you're just going to see the same classes over and over. So my advice, as a rogue, don't find some delusional guild who thinks TBC content is going to be extremely difficult and we need to min-max their raid setup to the absolute max, okay? You know, don't be joining guilds like that if you're a rogue. Join, you know, the more friendly, the more down-to-earth kind of guilds, and if there's none of them on your server, then I'd even consider changing servers, to be honestly, because of how the community is, you know, dealing with all this kind of, you know, class stigma and everything like that. I honestly think that I might even consider making my own guild and prioritizing recruiting melee DPS, the rejected, the unwanted, the unloved DPS, and making my own guild and calling it the rejected, and just proving to everyone that you can clear the content very easily, smooth as butter, without a try-hard, sweaty, optimal raiding composition. Anyway guys, the video definitely got a little ranty at the end there, definitely going to just end the video now. My name is MetaGoblin, until my next video, ciao.